Today we have a joint presentation from three speakers from the Centre for Population Change, Traute Meyer, Paul Bridgen from the University of Southampton, and Lisa Davison from the University of Stirling. And today they'll be presenting on the CPC project, Retrenchment Without Effect, exploring the link between pension reforms and public pension adequacy of new retirees in 7 European countries. So I'll pass over to the speakers now to get started when they're ready.
Okay, I thank you very much, Sarah, for inviting us here. And Lisa and I are here. I think Paul was going to join us, but I can't see him yet. He just texted me he got stuck in traffic, and also unfortunately he will have to do some teaching in half an hour, so we won't have a lot. He won't be here for very long, but Lisa and I, we can do this. We have been working on this project for quite a while, and we are, very happy to present the results here. Lisa, do you want to switch to the next slide? Very good. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Hi. So this is the background of our work, and that of the paper that recently came out. Is that we, Paul and I, have done a lot of work together and looked at the comparative pension policy literature, and in that there is a kind of consensus, which is that the population aging, and together with economic trends, economic globalization, since the 1980s, led to certain changes in pension systems, because, of course, there was cost pressure in mature industrialized democracies, and they were particularly heavy for public and mandatory pension systems. And so a number of reforms have been enacted, and in various countries did different things, but they were all kind of traveling in a similar direction. So from that portfolio, they raised pension ages, governments. There were generally the reversal of early retirement schemes. We can see there was a move from the public towards multi-pillar systems. The World Bank favored that at the time. There was also a shift from the pay-as-you-go public towards more capitalized systems. Demographic factors were introduced to link pension level rises with aging. Changes in indexation pension level indexation did pretty much the same thing. On the other hand, we also see some inclusive reforms, not everywhere, but we do see an increase in coverage so that the greater parts of the population are included in the system, in public and mandatory systems. There are more minimum income schemes, and importantly, almost everywhere, at least in Europe, care-related rights were introduced. Overall, you can say that these more inclusive reforms, they benefited women more than men, because women are involved with family work, but also because they are more vulnerable in the labor force. So the effect of all this, if we compare individuals retiring before the reforms and after the reforms, then you would say that the full public or mandatory pension would be obtainable with fewer contribution years, higher replacement levels, and it would be better linked to societal wealth, i.e. in terms of indexation, before the reforms for an individual than for individuals retiring after the reforms. And that can be called retrenchment. So generally, institutional retrenchment took place. This is what the literature says. Lisa, can you move to the next slide, please? So the limits of this is, interestingly enough, we found there was little research on the impact of this pension retrenchment or pension austerity on real pensioners' income. So on actual people. There is quite a few analyses of hypothetical workers. So you see, under a certain system, a hypothetical individual working full-time would receive X amount, but this type of analysis is basically there to evaluate the policy and its distributional intent, and it doesn't say so much about real people. There's analysis of aggregate outcomes, so pension spending as share of GDP, for example, but not based on the individuals. The main problem is that individuals' retirement income is, with this type of work, is that if the real retirement income of individuals is determined by more than just pension rules. Of course, it's the rules matter, but economic activity is as important. And we have seen from other research that cohorts entering the labor market in the 1970s work longer and work on higher incomes than earlier cohorts. And of course, this is related very largely to the change in women's lives, that they have entered the labor force and they are earning their own money there. And this kind of dynamic affects pension outcomes. So there's reason to ask whether pension rule change, or retrenchment, austerity, and employment change move in different directions. And so you can't really predict outcomes so easily. Lisa, can you move to the next, please? There are very good reasons for the limits of the comparative literature before talking about what we have done. The data situation isn't good, is bad actually. The Luxembourg Income Study is the only longitudinal comparative data set for European countries. So that's the one. We tried share and we looked at other possibilities, but it's simply for our type of study. When you are interested in a specific cohort, i.e. those people who retire at the age of retirement, then it's the sample sizes get too small, and so we had to use the LIS. It was the best one for us. Another reason for the limits of the comparative literature is that there is this time lag of reforms generally, but particularly with pensions. And here's just a nice quote from Deborah Price from 2006, where she wrote there about the Pension Commission in the UK and the report of the Pension Commission, and saying that the pension reforms introduced now will have some impact on pension poverty decades in the future, but will have almost no impact on current pensioners. So it is just really to relate reform, even when significant, an outcome in pensions is a really tricky business. Nevertheless, it was our starting point because we thought that 25 years, if we take the 1980s as a starting point, then 25 years after a legacy of austerity in pension policy, we should at least try to evaluate impact on adequacy of people. And this is what we have done with this study. Have been talking for very long to just explain why we have done this, but I think this is important. Our focus in this study is on public and mandatory pension entitlement, just, yeah, to say that. Lisa, please. So what have we done? We have compared institutional change, so pension policy changes on the one hand, and pension outcomes on the other. And our general question was, does the pension income decline of real people in line with pension system retrenchment? Or if there wasn't any pension system retrenchment, do we see this in the income? In what way is there a relationship? And what we have done is we compared individuals retiring in between 1993 and 1997 and between 2018 and 2020, so quite as far apart from each other as we could make it with the data that we had, two cohorts in 7 European countries. And to measure our institutional change, we are using the calculations of the OECD, which many of you will know. They evaluate institutional change on a regular basis, starting 2002 using hypothetical workers. So you can see what the generosity of systems at each point in time. So we compared the earliest date and the latest date relevant for our data. We then, to have our real outcomes of real people, we use the Luxembourg Income Study in 2 cohorts, 5 waves. Lisa will say a little more about this in a minute. We calculated the average annual pensions of these retirees at normal retirement age. So we are this normal retirement age changes, we use the age at normal retirement and then related this to the national average wage level, and that gives us a relative pension level, which is an adequacy measure. And then we compared the earliest wave with the last available one. And if we do that, only from European countries, only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only these ones remain that we have listed here, 7 ones. And so then our question was, doing this, whether institutions and relative pension levels moved in the same direction. And so the next slide, please. And I think this is, before I hand over to Lisa, just to say our hypotheses were 2. We assumed that pension adequacy for the real individuals will decline in countries where pension reforms have reduced OECD projected replacement rates for public mandatory systems. So this would be if institutions just, if people responded to institutions one-to-one. And the other hypothesis is that pension adequacy for real individuals will decline less for women than men in countries where pension reforms have reduced projected replacement rates, and they will increase more in countries where OECD projected replacement rates have increased. This is because what I said earlier, that we know that the vulnerable and women care is protected better. And with that, I hand over to Lisa.
Thank you. I apologize if there's any background noise. I'm in a communal area and it was quieter when I sat down than when the meeting started, so apologies. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Okay. So firstly, as Traute mentioned, we used OECD data to look at the replacement rates and what was going on with those over the time period. So the earliest time period was 2002, which is represented by the blue bars, and then the most recent at the time of analysis, because this analysis started, I want to say 2021 when we were originally doing this, was 2019. And so the numbers above represent the difference between 2002 and 2019. I've color-coded those red or green, depending on whether they're going up or down. So you can see that for most countries, there is a decline. Only Austria and Poland separate by male and female. All of the other countries are mixed in together. And the only countries where OECD saw an increase in replacement rates was in Austria for the women, in the Czech Republic, and in Italy, which was only a tiny increase. So as Traute mentioned earlier, we used the Luxembourg Income Study. This was the most appropriate data for the analysis that we wanted to complete. And we ended up with just shy of 48,000 people across the 7 countries. So that was Austria, the Czech Republic, Germany, Greece, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the UK. And we chose these countries based on the data availability at wave 4 and also in wave 10 and 11 so that we could draw comparison. So, sorry, our reference wave was wave 4, which was data collected between 93 and 97. And then our first comparison wave was wave 5 for most countries, but wave 6 for Poland, because Poland didn't have wave 5 data. So that data was collected between 1998 and 2005 for Poland, but stopped at 2002 for the rest of them, which aligns with the first wave of the OECD replacement rates. And then the most recent data, which at the time, I imagine that there are potentially another wave at least out there now. We have wave 10 for the Czech Republic, Greece and Italy, which was data collected in 2016. And then for Austria, Poland, Germany and the UK, that data was collected in wave 11, and that was 2018 to 2020. We did account for the different years in the analysis so that we could group them together and it not be too much difference. So we looked at, most of the data was supplied in euros, but we did use historical exchange rates to change over those countries that weren't provided in euros, for example, the Czech Republic and the UK, and I think Poland. Those were the 3 countries that we had to use exchange rates for. So we used relative pension level, which is a determination of the adequacy of pensions. So it looks at the benefit that someone receives in relation to the average wage of the country at the time, which meant that we could compare this across cohorts and countries, because if we just used the raw value of the pension, it wouldn't really be that comparable across time, and it wouldn't really be that comparable across the countries either. And for that, we used, from the Luxembourg Income Study, we used PI 32, which is public contributory pensions. And the calculation at the side here is pension divided by average wage, which we obtained from OECD data and data from the Luxembourg Income Study to calculate it, and that came out as relative pension. The next slide. So I don't usually include regression tables in presentations because I know that's not everyone's favorite thing to see, but I have really simplified this one. I think it's easier than trying to explain the numbers so you can sort of see it all in one go. So what we looked at, which, as I mentioned, there were some differences in waves. So for wave 6, we've got Poland, and then for wave 10, we've got Czech Republic, Greece, and Italy, but those are grouped. So wave 5 and 6 go together, and wave 10 and 11 go together. So what we looked at is a comparison across waves, and we compared the waves with the baseline. So that was wave 4. And I'll go on to include my control variables in the next slide, but this is just our main results and what we found differences between the waves. So for example, in Austria, we found that between the original wave, which was mid-90s, and wave 11, which was 2018 to 2020, we found that relative pension level had decreased significantly. The same in Poland. The UK had increased. And for Greece, we only saw this difference in the first block of time. So we only saw a decrease between wave 4 and wave 5. So that was mid-90s and early 2000s. But by the time it got round to 2016, which was wave 10, there was no significant difference between wave 4 again. So that shows that it went down and then it was coming back up. So as I mentioned, we had some other control variables in the model. I had anticipated having the paper open at the same time. I wasn't going to share the slides, but I have the slides open, so forgive me if I don't know the numbers off by heart. But our other variables included sex, so we compared males and females, and across the board, every country, females were lower. Their relative replacement rates were lower in this analysis. We compared marital status for all countries. For most countries, we had the reference was never married, and we compared that with people who were currently married, widowed, or had currently married, widowed, or divorced. I've got the other option there. So we found that in all countries, people who were widowed had higher replacement, higher relative pensions, and in the Germany and the UK, those who were never married had higher relative pension levels compared to people who were divorced or currently married. And in Italy, this was the opposite way around. So those who never married had lower relative pensions compared to those who were currently married and divorced. This was different for Greece because it didn't have the depth of the different categories. So we compared married and not married, but there was no significant difference for Greece. And then our final variable was education, which we used the international ISCED 2011 categorization. So we had low, medium, and high, which sort of cuts off at tertiary, secondary, and immediately forgotten what the lowest category was, but that was our reference category. And for all of the countries, bar the UK, we'll come to her in a second, we found that compared to low education, people with a medium education had slightly higher relative pension, and then people with the highest education had even higher again relative pension level. There was a strange result in the UK whereby those with medium level education actually had higher relative pension than those with high education. So it was sort of low, high, and then medium education in increased ranking of relative pension level. So in comparison to the OECD replacement rates, which ties back into hypothesis 1, we found that our results did not really align with what we thought in hypothesis 1, where we would see a decline in countries where the OECD replacement rates had fallen, and that was not necessarily the case. This was only really consistent in Poland and slightly in Austria, but it didn't reflect the sex differences that OECD reported. And then for hypothesis 2, we repeated the same analysis as before, where we compared with 4, 5, 6, 10 and 11, and we stratified this by sex. So we had a separate analysis for men and a separate analysis for women. Obviously, we took out the male-female control variable because that was a waste of time if you don't have both. And we found that the results were a little bit more consistent with our second hypothesis. So, for example, in Austria, we found that for females, their relative pension decreased over time, which was not consistent with what the OECD thought about female replacement rates. We had no significant results for the Czech Republic or Greece, but across the other countries, they largely aligned with what the OECD was saying. In part, that, as you can see, that sometimes the arrow was going in a slightly different direction, and we didn't have a significant result for Italian males, but it was better than the first hypothesis. So coming back to the conclusion, I might pass over to Traute for this because I don't currently have access to my notes.
Okay. So just coming back, repeating that we have the reforms. The reforms have reduced the projected public mandatory pension adequacy at pension age in many countries. There's not sufficient interest in the impact of these reforms on real retirees, but we have shown these results that we just presented. They indicate that indeed pension reform and pension income change are not systematically related. And that means that for pension researchers and pension analysis, that institutional analysis alone is an unreliable basis for pension outcome assessment, and that is, it doesn't happen always, but there is a certain imprecision in the literature where this is that the mere fact that something is retrenched means that this is also means that people will have less, and that isn't necessarily the case. So the relevant academic and policy questions that we should be asking are: have employment dynamics offset pension system retrenchment? And to what extent, and especially when we look at the gender dimension here, could we say that women's gains in terms of institutional gains and employment gains have offset men's losses if we assume that they in pensioner households that they live together? This could be quite relevant also for policymakers and the question of inadequacy and poverty risks, and how poverty risks and retrenchment are related. But before these questions can be explored better and comparatively, we need better data. I mean, even the list has, they do have this, and that is great, but there's differences between net and gross wages, and they change from wave to wave. So it's actually quite a challenge, and our results are, they are just an assessment that lacks, there's certain difficulties that we faced, so better data is needed, but it's clear that if we want to evaluate pension regimes and on the impact on retiring individuals, that this should be cohort sensitive, because of the differences because of the long-term effects of pension reform, and also because of the impact of employment change. The good news our results suggest is that real pension income is probably more robust than implemented by the retrenchment literature. And that is the end of the of our presentation. Here's our emails in case you like to contact us, and again links to our paper, but also to Deborah's paper.